This episode of The Candid Frame is sponsored by the Charcoal Book Club. The Charcoal Book Club is a monthly subscription service for photo book enthusiasts. Working with the most respected names in contemporary photography, Charcoal selects and delivers essential photo books to a worldwide community of collectors. Each month, members receive a signed first edition monograph and an exclusive print to add to their collections. Join the club by visiting charcoalbookclub.com and use the promo code TheCandidFrame at checkout and receive a 10% discount on your first membership payment. We also have the support of LensRentals.com, the largest online camera rental house in the U.S. They carry the most popular brands and models of cameras and lenses, but also anything you need for video, lighting, post-processing accessories, and more. Whether you need something for a one-time assignment or want to test it out before you buy, LensRentals.com is there to help. Explore their extensive inventory and save 10% on your first order when you sign up for their newsletter at LensRentals.com/newsletter. The rock and roll mythos, in all its variations, has been shaped not only by its music, but by its imagery. When I think of certain bands or performers, there are photographs that immediately come to mind. Whether it's the Beatles, the Sex Pistols, Jimi Hendrix, or Bob Dylan, there are photographs that exemplify those artists at the apex of their creativity and their fame. Cleveland-based photographer Janet Macoska has been creating just such images of performers including U2, David Bowie, Tina Turner, Devo, Kiss, the Black Keys, and countless more. Some of her best work has been created in her hometown, a city that is not only home to the Rock and Roll Museum, but has also served as an important focal point for many rock and rollers' careers. Bruce Springsteen is among them, and Janet has created an incredible archive of the boss's career, including his very first performance in Cleveland as an opening act for a British guitar band. In her book, Bruce Springsteen, Live in the Heartland, Janet shares photographs and stories that provide a unique perspective on the evolution of not only a legendary musician and entertainer, but also that of a photographer who has her own story to tell. This is Ibarion X, and welcome back to The Candid Frame. Well, thank you for joining us.
I'm thrilled to join you.
I really enjoyed the book.
Thank you.
I finished going through it this morning. One of the reasons I like the book is not just because of your photographs, which are amazing, but I felt that it was as much of a story about the relationship between Bruce Springsteen and Cleveland.
Yes.
And I really loved getting that sort of history lesson between, the growth, the development of him as a musician and as a performer, and the importance that Cleveland played in that. So kudos on producing just a wonderful book.
Thank you. I mean, because I'm from Cleveland, and that, I've shot other places too, but it is very unique what Bruce had with Cleveland, and we are kind of a safe spot for him, so that when they call it Asbury Park West, Cleveland, because we were one of the first cities to adopt him and love him and believe in him, besides his hometown, besides New Jersey, the whole state of New Jersey. So we had that intimate connection very early on with him in his career. And that's, I think, what shows what you feel looking at the photos, but also if you were sitting in the audience, you would just know that that he was your guy, that he spoke to you personally, whether it was 1,000 people in the audience or 80,000 people in the audience.
Looking through the pictures and then reading the text really gave me a sense that his was a road band, that as much as he's known for the albums he recorded, so much of his work, his persona, what he was as an entertainer was so much tied to being on the road and performing in front of people that really helped to shape him. And it's really interesting, since you were there at the very beginning, to see him develop and grow while you were growing and changing as a photographer yourself.
Exactly.
I think it's really interesting parallel. Did you ever consider those parallels yourself?
Well, this is the COVID baby. This is the 18 months of not being able to pick up a camera and shoot what I love to shoot. So with this project, I got to do this deep dive into my negatives. But until I didn't actually know that first show that I shot of Bruce, which is February 1st, 1974, and he opened for a British band called Wishbone Ash. And I went to photograph Wishbone Ash. I knew very little about Bruce Springsteen. So my first show shooting rock and roll is that show, but my first person that I photographed as a rock and roll photographer, baby rock and roll photographer, was Bruce Springsteen. And that just blew my head off my shoulders. I mean, it was crazy, and it made it more important to tell this story because, he's my first.
And you talk about that you sensed something in him because you had gone there to photograph the openers.
Yeah.
I mean, not the openers, but the headliner. The headliner. Yeah. And he was opening for the show, but you were so fascinated by what you saw that you ended up exposing more frames than you had anticipated. What was it about him that fascinated you, even in those early moments when you were just discovering him?
Well, knowing now after all these years how his look developed and his stage persona developed, it really was at the very beginning of his power as a performer. But he had it already. I mean, he had Clarence Clemens next to him and probably different members of the band that exist now. And he was more, there were people who believed he would be the next Bob Dylan because he had a kind of quieter sound and storytelling. But with that, maybe not being as exuberant as he would become on stage, he still had that power and charisma and the dynamics of his personality and his stories. He was a storyteller from the very beginning. So, even though that audience was there to see a British guitar band, they sat there and they listened to him and they were drawn in to his world, sitting there with him. And by the end of 45 minutes, they were up on their feet saying, this is beyond what any of us expected it to be. And that was the same with me. I mean, I have to say I was probably exuberant myself just being in that situation and being able to photograph rock and roll. That I'm sure I was excited about that. And then before I knew it, it was like, ooh, whoops! Look at all the frames I shot on him, and I only have a few left for reaction.
You've seen a lot of different performers, but describe what you're seeing when he is up on stage, and you're photographing him. What is this thing that captivates you as a photographer visually when you're seeing him up there?
Oh wow. When I go to photograph anyone in performance, I get really quiet inside, and I don't even hear the music. There's a way that I want to connect with that musician on stage, that artist on stage, and almost kind of channel what they're giving me and the audience, and create those 60th of a second moments of that performance. And while I'm aware of lighting and what they're doing at a particular moment, it's really reacting. And I can't say how I decide when to push the button on the camera. It's anticipation almost that they're about to give me something really unique, and they do. And you have to. Somebody said one of my heroes, Baron Woolman, who shot in the 60s, he said, if you see in your camera an image that's like, wow, and great and fabulous. He goes, if you see it, you've missed it. It's almost really knowing that something's coming and being just a step ahead of it. I know, it's kind of weird.
Considering that you've photographed him over so many years and you've seen him, develop and change, do you feel that familiarity with him through your lens made you more adept in terms of being able to anticipate those moments?
I would say so. And I would also point out, because I'm guessing you have listeners that are photographers of young and old, all ages. And I'll take you back to film photography, 35 millimeter or whatever, film photography, where there is no preview of your photo. There isn't a way to check it in the moment like you can with digital. It's a lot of instinct. It's a lot of knowing what your camera can do and how to push film to get it to do more, and playing with the light, but checking out what's in front of you and then disregarding it and going to some kind of chemistry set in your head to figure out the photo. But knowing the artist, knowing the music, because I couldn't even study videos on him. There was no YouTube. Knowing the music was what helped me as a photographer. I mean, I would get the records from the record company or buy them, and I would just sit with them for days before and just listen. And, once I'd shot Bruce a few times, I could see that he was developing bits or things with, like, the big man, certain songs where he'd do similar actions in that same song, and I'd wait for it. But truthfully, I was in the moment with him all the time, and the surprises were surprises to me too. And even though someone would photograph Bruce, I guess at his peak action moments where he's screaming into the microphone and doing that kind of action, you probably saw in the book that there are quieter moments too, where the lights cut off a bit and he's in shadow. And I found those moments really fascinating as a photographer looking at Bruce. I wanted more moments like that to just get his all around persona and capture the many moods that happen during a concert, not just the ones that everybody expects to see and wants to go and photograph.
My favorite photo in the book is the one where he's leaning back on Clarence Clemens as Clarence is playing the horn.
Yeah.
And he's like looking it up, and his eyes are almost at the top of the head, looking up at Clarence. And when I turned the page and I look at that shot, just a smile came to my face, because it's one of those rare rock and roll shots where you see the relationship between the musicians that are up on stage. Because a lot you'll see the various musicians maybe in a wide shot, each of them sort of playing their instruments. But I love that moment because it really reflected the love, the respect, and just the warmth that they shared. I've heard about it. I never got the chance to see them all together live, but in that picture, I saw it embodied in a single frame. And I know that it's, as you just said, you were shooting film in those days, so it wasn't an easy feat to get shots like that. Talk to me about that particular moment.
Well, it was obvious. I mean, that band was really, really close. They were a family, and carefully chosen by Bruce, but a family. And he and Clarence were just the most interesting of brothers. I mean, they were. Here's Bruce, whose nickname is Scooter, so it's Scooter and the big man. But there's little Bruce, and the big man is just so solid and earthy, and he's the foundation. Even though you think Bruce is the foundation of that band, it's Clarence Clemens. He holds it all together, and he gives Bruce that possibility of flying around the stage and coming back to land, with Clarence, where it's safe and it's fun and it's his family. I mean, that whole band is his family, and their interactions on stage are are that kind of, carry that kind of love and respect. And I think that's another reason why he's been so immensely popular and the band was so immensely popular. So that shot would happen probably in several ways during a show. Maybe not that exact movement. It was my intention to want to capture them like that, hope to capture them like that, and show that in a single frame, have that kind of relationship depicted in one frame.
It's a beautiful shot. You grew up in a time that it was still sort of the heyday of radio and especially the DJ. And you mentioned in the book your transistor radio, and I remember the one I had that was gifted to me by my grandmother. It was a very fond memory about extending that little metal antenna, trying to get that frequency for my favorite channel. But tell me about, what was the station you would tune to in those early years when you're getting turned on to rock and roll? And who were some of the, the radio personalities and DJs that really shaped what you came to understand as rock and roll?
In Cleveland in the 60s, when I would have been, I was 10 years old when the Beatles came to America in 64. And they actually, I would say, they were the inspiration for me wanting to be amongst music and musicians and wanting to be part of that and tell that story. So my station then was KYW in Cleveland, and it became WKYC. And my two favorite disc jockeys were Jerry G. He was the afternoon guy. And later, a couple years later, Big Jack Armstrong. And I ended up running a fan club for Big Jack. And he let me come down to the station and hang out in the DJ lounge where I got to talk to Jerry G. And Jerry G, who had gone on tour with the Beatles a couple times, would get all this stuff sent from the office in London. And so he'd give me Beatles Christmas records that only he got. Or, it was just treats. Wow. There were treats. And they treated me so well, like a little sister, because they didn't have to treat a 12-year-old. I was about 12 at that time, that well. But I'd come down and answer fan mail for them. Jack would give me records, big boxes of 45s. It was great. And I would bring my camera down there. And I'd photograph what was happening with the DJs, or when they had personalities come in who were going to do a concert that night, like Sonny and Cher, I'd take photos of them. And my first printed photo, my first published photo was Sonny and Cher at WKYC Radio in 1966. And I sold it to Teen Screen Magazine and got $2. So that was my kind of intro to that world, and also about the same rate of payment that you might get today. But it was, I just relish and treasure the fact that I had that opportunity to hang out at a radio station and be, again, it's my intro to being amongst the music and doing a job that I love. And again, these guys didn't have to do that. They didn't have to let the kid in, but they did. It was a great training ground. It was wonderful.
Your parents must have been incredibly supportive, letting their, preteen run around in a records, at a radio station.
It was
those long hairs.
Yeah. It was a much more innocent day, and dangerous things, I guess, didn't happen like they do now. My dad was a lawyer at a legal firm across the street from the radio station. So sometimes I'd go hang out and then, take the rapid transit with him on the way home. So it was pretty cool. And Jerry G would, talk to my mom and tell her it was okay. And we're all looking after her. So there I was.
How did you figure out that you could actually earn a living from it? Because you wanted to do it. You wanted to be in that world, but it's not like today where you can go on the internet and you can follow a bunch of people who have done this. There was no sort of game plan for making that happen. How did you do it?
Well, it was based on what I saw in Life magazine. My mom got Life magazine, and I saw photojournalists making a living telling stories with their photos, and not just I remember one story about James Dean goes home to his hometown in Indiana, and how fun that was because he's going to the local barber shop, he's just walking down the street and visiting the hardware store, and I'm thinking, that's it, because you can really learn about somebody, not just a person who's in the movie or how they are on stage as a band or an artist. I want to know who they are when they grew up or who they are when they're off stage. And Life magazine did it, so why shouldn't I be able to do it? Also, the 16 magazine and Teen Beat magazine type publications for kids and teenagers were doing the same thing. So there was a method to the madness in that I could see that it happened and people made a career out of it. And my intention was to go to journalism school, to take 2 years at a community college in Cleveland, get all the courses you needed to get, and then go to, I don't know, I think Boston had a journalism school, and Chicago, there was a journalism school there, but I never made it because I was doing what I wanted to do right off the bat.
So in terms of learning the business side, that's the harder part. So tell me about figuring that out.
Well, when you are doing freelance photography, I think that you better teach yourself how to take care of yourself, as a business person. Otherwise, you'll give it up in a year because you go be an accountant or go be, I don't know what you're going to be. But I was too determined to be in this business. So I learned how to make it work for me. I learned how to go to promoters and ask for their help getting me into shows and giving them pictures in return. But then record labels started hiring me to, if they brought Blondie or Lou Reed or somebody in for the day to take them around to radio stations, they needed a photographer with them. And there I was at 19, getting jobs with record labels, not getting paid a lot, but getting an opportunity to have behind the scenes photos as well as everything they needed, and then print little 8x10s for them to give, to the record distributor that we visited and the disc jockeys we visited. And that's the start of a business, apart from, trying to sell pictures to magazines as well. And the
What was your first album cover?
Because I don't know, it wasn't album covers per se. I think a lot of those shots went to New York and LA photographers, truthfully. But bands were always wanting some of my photos to use for PR shots, or, it'd be in the booklet inside the album or in the back of. I mean, I'm on the Stage album by Bowie, but it's the back cover. And, and the same thing, the Kinks used a lot of my photos on their repackaging. It's a lot of that. I get a lot of repackaging in books, and, I'm on Clash albums and Zeppelin albums and things like that. It's just.
But early on, I can imagine it must have been quite the kick to see your work in the material for an album, considering how precious they had been to you at one point.
Yes. And how much I'd studied them. I think anybody who grew up with records and albums knew how much fun it was, not just to put the record on the turntable, but you'd sit there and you'd look at the album cover and you'd read all the credits. And if there were liner notes or lyrics, you sat there and it was like, it was your homework, a nice homework, a fun homework, to sit there and absorb everything about the music, the artwork, the lyrics, any little factoids they would throw to you on those albums were just the best.
Even though Los Angeles and New York are long associated with the sort of the business of music, Cleveland is often referred to or considered as the heartbeat of rock and roll, the city that embodies the heartbeat of rock and roll. And it has a really unique place in history with respect to that. What is it about that city and that part of the country that allowed it to become that?
I think the older Cleveland of the 60s and 70s was really blue collar, middle class workers who just, after their work week, they just wanted to have a beer and listen to rock and roll. And the labels knew that if they could get a record played in Cleveland and have it start to take off from Cleveland, it would hit everywhere else in the country. And they started doing that from the 50s onward. We were kind of this breakout market. Once we got to the 70s and it was album-oriented radio, we had a station, WMMS, that really made conscious efforts to introduce new music to listeners in Cleveland. We had the advantage of hearing David Bowie before David Bowie was heard through America. And in fact, Bowie played his first American concert in Cleveland. And it worked that way. Again, in the 70s, which is when I was really starting to shoot, the promoters even had themselves organized that way. They'd listen to what WMMS was playing, and they'd get on that artist quickly. Like, oh, this is coming up in the charts, and it's really getting good reaction. So we had clubs. We had the Cleveland Agora, which probably held, I don't know, 1,000 if you really pushed everybody in there. But they'd jump on a band, play them first, and then the other promoter, which is Belkin Productions, who had 3,000-seat halls and 10,000-seat halls to play with and 20,000-seat halls to play with, would see the success of an artist at the Agora and book them 3 months later in the little 3,000-seat venue. And you could watch a band succeed just by a year of Cleveland activity, going from the club to the 3,000-seat hall and then upwards. Many times it was a rapid growth for those artists, and everybody in America watched that trend and jumped on it then.
If I ever added up all the money I spent on photo equipment that I wanted but really didn't need, I think I'd shock myself. I'm pretty sure that I could have paid for at least several lengthy vacations abroad. Though I often sold those things to offset the purchase of other equipment, I always felt some regret. I have never felt that way about a photo book. For me, they are investments in my education and my career. Whether it's a new acquisition or a book that I purchased way back in college, I return to them because I always derive something invaluable from them. That's why I'm such a fan of charcoal books and why I'm so glad to have them as a sponsor. Whether you already have a library or are just beginning one, the Charcoal Book Club is the best way to enhance and expand your collection with some of the best first edition books from contemporary photographers. Take a look at their website and examine the great titles they offer, and you'll get a sense of what you have to look forward to. And even if you don't like that month's release, you can choose another one of their titles of similar value. You have nothing to lose. They offer free shipping to the US, Canada, and the UK. It's subsidized elsewhere. Join the club at charcoalbookclub.com today, and remember to use the code TheCandidFrame at checkout and receive a 10% discount on your first membership payment. And if you want to use certain equipment but don't want to spend all that money on something you aren't sure of or only need for a one-time event, you have a friend in LensRentals.com. It's not only your best resource for cameras and lenses, they offer an extensive inventory of camera bags, tripods, strobes, audio equipment, and backgrounds. They provide you a convenient and affordable way to rent equipment to determine whether or not you need it as a permanent addition to your toolkit. Check out their inventory and save 10% on your first order when you sign up for their newsletter at lensrentals.com/newsletter. And thanks to all of you who support The Candid Frame financially. Of the thousands of people that listen to the show, only a few hundred support the show financially. If you want to change that for yourself, please contribute to The Candid Frame today. You can do that by contributing $5, $10, or $20 a month by visiting patreon.com/The Candid Frame. Just $5 a month from you makes a big difference. Thank you so much for your kindness and support. I have a great appreciation for the work because I know that then as now, these venues are not designed for photographers. The lighting has always been pretty much trash.
Awful.
It's just enough for the musicians to be able to play. But with respect to the photographer being able to make a decent picture, not so much. So I know you were working, with some black and white and some color. But talk to me about the challenges of shooting, which at the time were still moderate ISO film speeds, especially when you're shooting with color. And how did you sort of make that work?
Well, I didn't shoot color a lot. Magazines were still using primarily black and white. As I've discussed with other photographers who did what I did, like, Bob Alford in Detroit, he did a talk at the Rock Hall once, and I shot for the Rock Hall for about 8 years. And we're sitting around and I said, "So Bob, how did you decide who to shoot in color?" And he goes, "Well, I'd always have some color." He goes, if they were really hot and getting hotter, I'd throw a roll of color in there. He goes, but it was expensive. And it was. I mean, we would figure out before we went to a concert how many rolls to take. And black and white, you could process yourself. You could push the film to get a higher speed, to get those pictures that were hard to get with the bad lights. But it wasn't until there were a couple magazines. Circus Magazine is a rock magazine that decided to use a lot of color, and the teen magazines did color pinups. So, if you had a prospect like that, then you would put a roll of color film in. But mostly, at the beginning, we were just shooting black and white. That's why when you see a few odd photos of Bruce in color, I'm trying to get a good color shot, but you can't shoot flash. You can't shoot flash on that. And man, lots of red lights or just nasty looking lights. Not really the best for color. And use an Ektachrome. So you didn't have a lot of possibilities there.
Speaking of photographing in color with the lower ISO films, I think that the fact that you were shooting at a moderate shutter speed, not like you can today, and push the ISO to 12,800 and shoot it, 500th of a second. I think that the fact that the images have some blur and some motion really adds to the feel of the images that I saw in the book. I think that some of the images today, though you can get a tack sharp image of the performer, sometimes it still feels a little empty. You may capture that peak moment that you referred to earlier that some photographers are always going for, but there's something to be said for an image that sort of captures the essence of a performance. Talk to me about now, because now you're able to get stuff tack sharp, but from your history in terms of other images that a tack sharp picture isn't necessarily the best photograph. So talk to me now that you have the option, the creative choices involved in making your photographs.
Well, I wanted to point out one shot, which of course you've seen, but listeners haven't seen. It's me trying to shoot some color at that 1976 performance of Bruce. And the only reason it really works is because somebody in the audience, and this is really like impossible to do, shot a little flash camera, because there's a flash that happens, and there is that blurry thing going on, except that it makes it more exciting, because it's like, yep, Janet's trying to do this, and she's cursing the lights again, and then somebody adds a little pop of flash, and it's, whoa, yeah, that's it. That's what I wanted. I just couldn't do it by myself. Now with digital, man, it's heaven with digital. I don't want to, and I hate to say that because I love everything about film. But now I can look at what they're throwing at me on stage, and the lights, which are also improved, they're run by computers and zipping around, and they become another character on stage. I can get like layers layers of light coming in, and the artist is in the foreground, but I'm getting like all kinds of different dimensions of light coming through the back and the middle and the front, and it becomes just a real game, a challenge in a game to see what I can pull out of a photo now, because I've got all these fun elements to play with. It's great.
Many of your contemporaries, even though they may have been shooting at the time, like you, for freelancers, for magazines and publications, are now benefiting from the value of their archive. Mm-hmm. And that's helping a lot of guys and gals in terms of being able to sustain themselves. Talk about being able to leverage your archive in that way.
I'll tell you, it's been a struggle for a lot of photographers. And I think we're finally coming into our own now. And I don't know why it didn't happen before. I don't know if our photography was not valued, but I remember talking to Henry Diltz, who, again, is one of those first rock and roll photographers. He existed in LA, still does, shooting, albums for Crosby, Stills and Nash, and he was a fellow musician, and so that's how he ended up hanging with some of these people and doing that. But about 20 years ago, I called him on behalf of a gallery here and said, "Henry, you want to do a show here?" He said, "Yeah, I would," because I've got kids in college and I'm still trying to make ends meet. He goes, "But I can't afford to put on a show right now. I mean, because it's expensive. It's not just the photos and it's framing. It's how do I get them from place to place to place." But now he's with Morrison Hotel Gallery. He's part owner in this national company that promotes and sells photographers, rock and roll photographers' photos. And he's just, and now museums will call him up. Now museums can call him up and say, "Don't worry about it, Henry. We'll put it on for you. You don't have to worry about the prints or the frames or how to ship it. We'll take care of that." And I think that's the place where hopefully we're getting to right now, because we're losing a lot of our genius master photographers who shot in the 60s. Baron Woolman just passed away and Jim Marshall is gone. And, really, I think especially Baron knew how to archive his material. And I believe he just gave his archive to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So wow. It's still a conundrum here as to how a photographer takes care of their work after they're going to be gone, if you don't have a family that can take that on. So we're still trying to figure it out. But I think, for example, with this Bruce Springsteen book, I hit a vein here, a vein of gold. I don't know that I'm going to, really hit a vein of gold, but I hit a place where I can see the photos take on a new life and tell the stories I always wanted them to tell beyond one or two photos from a concert. It's kind of reached a level that I'm very happy with, and I hope it continues.
Yeah, because I felt it was a story, but it was also a journey, because it really gave me an appreciation for him that I hadn't had before. Because even though I got turned on to him with the Born in the USA album, and leading up to this conversation, I went back into the archive, starting from his first album, listening. And then having read the book, I was able to, relate to the albums during the different periods that were illustrated in the book. And it was really fascinating to get as a fuller experience of the music, the man, and your photographs. So, and it's rare that I think that that a book can and does provide that. So it's one of the reasons I really loved going through it.
Thank you. And that's what I hope the fans get. I mean, it's a book for fans. It's great if photography fans pick it up too and enjoy it for that. But I'll tell you, since this book has come out, and it's only been out less than a month, just the talks that I've done where Bruce Springsteen fans have shown up, it's seeing it in their faces how much they enjoy this journey too. They're getting to go back in time and revisit these concert tours that they've gone to, and they've gone to a lot of shows. You know, one person comes up and says, "Well, yeah, I've been to 80 shows, but he's been to, you know, a couple hundred shows, and we've seen Bruce on Broadway 6 times." And you're going, "Whoa," you know, like they're serious fans. And I'm glad they like this book and accept it and find pleasure in this book, because I started out as a fan who wanted to find a place in music, and that's what still lives in me. I mean, you know, I have the heart of a fan. When I go to a show, I'm just as happy as can be. It's where I find my greatest joy.
Are you still, you know, when you first saw Bruce, it was like a discovery of him. Have you had many such discoveries over the length of your career where you went to some concert and discovered a performer or a band that you just fell in love with?
Probably lots of times. I mean, I was a sponge back in the day when I'd go to a record company maybe every couple of months, and they would give me a big box of records, and it was like, whoa, it's Christmas and Halloween and everything else right here. And then you get to listen to all kinds of music, even music you wouldn't normally listen to. And I think that's still the way it is. I don't think I find those magical artists or bands as much, but I'm probably not looking as hard as I did when I was younger. And, you know, I found bands like Roxy Music, love Roxy Music, Bowie, and other bands that people don't know. There was a band called the Sensational Alex Harvey Band from Scotland. And Alex ended up giving me my first jobs shooting professionally. And again, I was only 19. And when I was ready to go over to England, he said, "You stay with my family." And he was the headliner at the Reading Festival in 1978. So I'm shooting the Reading Festival. I have this new family that adopts me, and every summer I go back over there, and doors just swing open because, you know, the record label knows that I know Alex. It's really, I've been doing this for 47 years now. There's just magical moments all the way through. There's really down times as well, but there's just been so many magical moments and so many great artists and great shows, and, you know, and I've made a living, not a huge, wonderful, sparkly living, but a nice living. So what else could you ask
Seems
for?
like the industry sometimes makes it far too difficult, you know, considering how reliant they are on the imagery that photographers like you create. And one of the things that I know is an issue is in terms of these legal documents people are expected to sign today in terms of copyright and approval and usages and, you know, all this craziness. How do you contend with it?
Well, if I know about them ahead of time, well, let's put it this way. Okay. For like 8 years or so, I shot for the Rock Hall, and I let them, the weight of those obligations, whatever somebody's going to throw at somebody on a piece of paper, a contract, it's like, here, guys, you handle it, because I'm just shooting for you. So why should my name be on this piece of paper with all those obligations? I shot we had the Hard Rock Roxino for 5 years, I was their photographer. I shot about 100 shows a year for them. And again, if we came up against that, for example, Cheap Trick now have a contract, and there's others, but Cheap Trick have a contract that says, we own everything. You're shooting, you come to us, and we'll let you have one photo for social media. But, oh, by the way, we own the copyright for everything, and we can use anything you shoot for free. If I was shooting that, not knowing that the Hard Rock was still going to pay me to be there, I would say, you know what you can do with this contract, because that's just obscene. It's just obscene. But the Hard Rock would say, you just sign Janet Macoska shooting on behalf of the Hard Rock Roxino. He said, if it comes down to lawyers, who do you think is going to win? The Hard Rock Corporation probably has as many lawyers, if not more, than Cheap Trick. But we'll play that game because we're paying them to be here. But Janet, you don't have to worry about it. Just shoot the photos. And that's okay. But it's ridiculous. And it just shows why I think this art form, I just don't think rock and roll photography is going to survive much past this. I know that's depressing, but it's contracts, it's 3-song limits, and it's everybody in the place having cell phones, shooting pictures that nobody controls, but yet they want to control professional photographers who make a band look the best they can look. I know you didn't ask that question.
It's a shame. I had to ask it, but
I
think that that despite how things are changing, I'm so glad that work like yours exists, because it just shows the love affair we have with music, and it illustrates it in a beautiful way. And hopefully at some point people who are making those decisions will realize, why aren't we getting as good photographs as they used to make? And it's because of the decisions you're making, idiot. Because those, some of those shots that you have, especially that shot you shot of Bruce from behind with the audience that was on the cover of your first book, that is a phenomenal photograph. And that never would have happened if you're all the way in the back of the stadium with a 300, 400 millimeter lens. That moment, that relationship between him and the audience would have been completely lost. So
I'm being quiet because you're saying all the wise things right now.
Fortunately, I'm not in the publishing industry to have any say.
No, but you're saying all the things that need to be said to support and save these images. You're saying it's necessary. It's part of. Here's how I'll say it. The music is the primary focus. The music and the artist are the primary focus, but we're the visuals to that soundtrack. And we can take people back to those moments too, the ones that they experienced when they were 17 and seeing Bruce Springsteen or whoever. And I'm just very proud to have done that.
Well, thank you for sharing it with us. I really appreciate it. My last question, which I ask each guest, is I ask them to recommend a photographer to suggest to our listeners. And it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be and why?
I'm not going to hit on who I really want, because there are these street photographers that they're turning up now where somebody really wasn't, they weren't popular, or they just didn't even shoot to be popular. And there's so much photography that is being discovered that are just interesting street photographers. But in terms of rock and roll, I keep saying Baron Woolman, because truthfully, that's who I looked at when I was younger. I looked at Henry Diltz and Baron Woolman and Jim Marshall, and they created space and need for all of us. I mean, we all came after. And Baron has amazing work. And he had amazing joy for what he did in the moment. There's just pictures of him on stage where he's got cameras hanging off of him, and he did Woodstock and Monterey and all that. But he's got a big, gigantic smile on his face because he's having fun too. And I guess that's the blessing in the kind of photography we have done in the music business, is that, again, it doesn't get better than this. It can be a pain in the butt a lot, but to be able to be in the presence of these musicians and have many times really great access to them is just the most fun you can have. So I would dig back and look at the folks who shot in the 60s to begin with. Oh, and Alfred Wertheimer, I don't know if I said that right, who photographed Elvis at the beginning. Oh, he'll just blow your head off your shoulders. I got to meet him once. I was just like a slobbery, drooly fan. I mean, it's just amazing what he was able to do because nobody knew Elvis at the time, and he was just hanging with this guy who, like, within a couple months, really exploded. There you go. I mean, there's a lot of great photographers. Yes.
Thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed talking with you. And again, I love the book.
Thank you. And I appreciate that you love the book and that you're giving me this time to talk about it with you.
Thanks to Janet for joining us. Find out more about Janet and her work by visiting janetmacoskaphotography.com. Your thoughts and feelings about this show matter. If you haven't already, please write a review on Apple Podcast or whatever service you use to listen to podcasts. It helps us to stand out among the thousands of podcasts that are out there. Your voice, it makes a big difference. And remember, you can support the show by contributing to our Patreon effort or make a one-time or recurring donation via PayPal. Thanks to Mark Gregory and Mary Preston Roberts for their recent contributions. We also provide a series of ebooks on photography available for purchase on our website. It's my way of sharing my experience and knowledge and another way for you to support the show. And if you can't find every episode of the show on whatever service you listen to podcasts, download the Candid Frame app, which is available for both Apple iOS and Android. And because of your generosity, it's free to download and use. There are no additional purchases required. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker, and our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at incompetech.com. And this is Ibadian X, and this is The Candid Frame.